it's got the best of me. Tell you why. Tell you why. Somebody above me's in a desperate state. Some kind of urgency, the kind that won't wait. I say tomorrow, he say today, and the man in my head, well, he tell me no way. Get working. I got 8 little fingers and only 2 thumbs. Will you leave me in peace while I get the job done?
Few motorcycles in the world have the classic heritage of triumph. But in the past decade, here at Hinckley and Leicestershire, the new Triumph Motorcycle Company has been writing another chapter in their history. In less than 4 years since their first bike rolled off the line, Triumph has established itself as a serious and long-term player, capable of designing, developing and manufacturing a wide range of motorcycles that are well engineered, with performance, reliability, character and classic individual styling. Bikes that are now in demand all round the globe, but which began life right here in one of the most modern, automated, in-house manufacturing facilities in the world. The new range for the 90s maintains the Triumph tradition as the classic British manufacturer. Over 80% of all components are sourced from the UK, and modularity allows parts like these conrods to be designed to suit both 3- and 4-cylinder engines. They're machined from raw forging through to finished product. In fact, all other components of high integrity and high stress, like crankshaft, cylinder head, crankcase, camshaft and frame, are manufactured or machined here at Hinckley, so that Triumph is able to control the quality, finish, consistency and availability. The end result is that 40% of the completed motorcycle is produced in-house, a percentage virtually unrivaled by any other manufacturers worldwide. To ensure high production standards, continuous investment is made in purpose-designed, state-of-the-art manufacturing processes. 2 sophisticated machining lines using the latest CNC machine tooling enable the aluminium cylinder head and crankcase castings sourced in this country and made to Triumph's design and specification to be machined, drilled and tapped in a complex series of stages. Inbuilt porosity checks ensure the integrity of major castings. And advanced robotics perform programmed maneuvers to deburr crankcases. Crankshafts face the same exacting standards, undergoing no less than a 19-stage process, including gear cutting, balancing to ensure outstanding smoothness, plasma nitride hardening for exceptional durability throughout the bike's life, and polishing to a mirror finish. And finally, they're electronically measured to extremely fine tolerances, which have been setting new industry standards.
Somebody above me's in a desperate state. Some kind of urgency, the kind that won't wait. I say tomorrow, he say today, and the man in my head, well, he tell me no way. Get working.
Immediately an engine is assembled, it's put through a comprehensive test covering ignition, compression, vibration, gear change, and numerous other functions. Only then can it be mounted in the frame to meet up with the other components. Triumph's exacting standards ensures turbine-smooth, torquey engines which have become a hallmark of the entire range, delivering performance and reliability. The sheer strength of any Triumph lies in its frame. The whole of the structure is manufactured in-house using micro-alloyed steel. Meanwhile, once the rear swinging arm has been manufactured, it's then machined on-site. Numerous other key components specific to the design of these bikes are also manufactured or machined here. And critical components like the suspension systems and brakes are developed and sourced from the most reputable manufacturers in the world to give excellent handling. Triumph motorcycles are built to a lasting finish. Recognizing the importance of corrosion protection, the company installed their own plating plant at an early stage, so that many of the exterior fasteners can be zinc cobalt plated to a finish that in many cases far exceeds industry standards. Each of these is tested in-house to hundreds of grueling hours of salt spray. And inside this purpose-built facility, the damage avoidance continues. An automated line powder coats engines, frames, cylinder heads, and a number of small covers and components to give tough protection in a variety of finishes. But when it comes to body paint, there are no substitutes for the human touch. Although the very latest technology is all around this purpose-built paint facility, it's the combination of craft skills that can produce the kind of superb high finish and detail across all the differing materials, a level of finish that's now winning the company praise worldwide. The sheer classical good looks of the Triumph range owe a lot to their heritage of design. But for durable machines like these motorcycles, the styling is also tough and practical, remarkably forgiving to accident damage. And when the bodywork, side panels and fairings are fitted, the now familiar identity of Triumph is revealed. At this stage, a further 60 quality control checks take place, with function of every component put to the test. Triumph is British. These and all future designs are developed totally internally on sophisticated 3D CAD systems by a specialist team responsible for enhancing and widening the current range, while all new ideas are continuously put to the test with grueling road trials, a key factor in the reliability of the range. But Triumph knows that the real test comes after the machine has been delivered to the customer. From the very start, the company has shown it can offer a personal and efficient backup service. It's large enough to guarantee supply, yet small enough to react quickly to customers' needs. If that need is urgent, next-day delivery can even be guaranteed throughout the UK and to a number of countries worldwide. A new 20,000 square foot warehouse holds parts stock for dispatch anywhere in the world. The company's total confidence in the quality and engineering of the product was clearly emphasized when it took the remarkable step of extending its unlimited mileage warranty from 12 to 24 months before it had even reached the second year of its production. It's a confidence that is passed on to their customers. The Triumph Motorcycle Company is here to stay. Plans for a new, larger and more advanced facility at a nearby site are well underway, which will allow the company to expand production and sophistication to meet the growing demand for these classic machines built on a heritage. Triumph Motorcycles. It's great to be back.
In 1967 is where we get the first usage of the Daytona namesake. The Daytona name was derived from American rider Buddy Elmore's win at the 1966 Daytona 200 race held at the Daytona International Speedway in Daytona Beach, Florida. The Daytona sacrificed low-speed tractability for a pronounced power step at 3,500 RPM that helped it compete with advanced designs from Japan. However, the increase in power reduced the life of valve gear, leading to heavy oil consumption, which, ironically, is a struggle that Triumph has had historically throughout its racing heritage. Don't get me wrong, I love the brand, but data shows us that the motors just aren't as reliable. In fact, the first 600cc Daytona was a bike that never got built due to financial problems at Triumph. The Triumph Daytona 600 was a short-stroke sporting version of the 650cc TR65 Thunderbird, an air-cooled parallel twin, but that bike never made it into production. In 1983, Triumph went into receivership, or known as bankruptcy here in the States. John Bloor, a former plasterer who acquired his wealth from building and property development, became interested in keeping the brand alive and bought the name and manufacturing rights from the official receiver. The new company, initially the Bonneville Coventry Limited, ensured that Triumph has produced motorcycles since 1902, winning as the title of the world's longest continuous production motorcycle manufacturer. Triumph went through some growing pains in the late 80s and early 90s while they basically started a brand new company from the ground up. It used to be called Triumph Engineering, and now it was called Triumph Motorcycles Limited, and they started off with one of the earliest and rarest iterations of the Daytona namesake, the Daytona 750, where only 200 were produced. Kicking things off with the newly minted Triumph Motorcycles Limited was the Daytona 750 and 1000, the former being a 750cc triple in a pretty heavy and bulky package, while the latter is a 1000cc four-cylinder answer to, at the time, modern competition. And while they weren't exactly hyper-competitive in the market at the time, Triumph used the platform to iterate and to get better. And while the middleweight offerings took some time to get really better, we're about to see how awful some of the early Daytona middleweights were, the next iteration of a big Daytona was the 955, and that one was a peach. In 1997, the 955 was where Triumph really came into the fold and cemented Triumph's signature triple for the new era. It was received with incredibly positive reviews, mainly for the same reasons that people rant and rave about Triumph's triple nowadays. Excellent torque in the mid-range, supple and predictable handling, and a great build quality. For a while there, the 955 was one of the only modern triples being manufactured. Later, they rolled out the revised edition in 2001. The 955i, with more power, lighter weight, and it was Triumph's proper race bike solution. The 955i is a bike I'd actually really love to get my hands on one day, having done research on this bike. It looks like such an awesome old-school triple. Fun fact, it actually had one of the most aggressive rakes of any sport bike at the time of its release, which is another Triumph feature, being that the modern-day 675 is also one of the most aggressive ergonomics of any middleweight. The Triumph TT600. Here's where Triumph went and tried to compete in what was at the time one of the hottest sport bike markets around, the 600cc class. This was before Triumph realized it was best to place their triple into the middleweight bike and decided to just go head-to-head and iterate on the four-cylinder 600cc sport bike class. However, it was not well received. It had some really anonymous styling, it wasn't offensive, but it wasn't interesting either. The cool thing at least was that it was a brand new motor for a brand new bike as well. At low speeds though, according to reviews, the throttle response wasn't ideal and the fueling was a bit tricky. While the TT600 didn't have the Daytona name slapped anywhere on it, it was definitely a spiritual successor to the modern day Daytona we know. The TT600 could never quite compete with the 600s of its day, however. The 2002 Daytona 600. Look at this little happy-faced bastard! The Daytona 600 was an updated version of the TT600's engine and was dressed in some new fairings. And while the Daytona 600 had one of the best handling chassis at the time, a feature that continued to this day with the modern day 675, it was a bike that in isolation was decent, but when compared to other offerings from Japan, it still couldn't quite stack up, putting out 97 horsepower when the Japanese competition was easily exceeding over 105 and made the Daytona overshadowed, and the fueling was still not quite up to par compared to Japanese competition. Enter 2005 with the Daytona 650. Triumph's final iteration of their four-cylinder Daytona saw them going the Kawasaki route and just bumping the displacement up to 647 cc's, giving the bike the kick in the pants it needed to start competing against the Japanese. Reviews slated that it was more at home on the road than the track. It wasn't quite a replica racer like the R6 or the ZX6R, but the bump in displacement brought the British bike closer to what enthusiasts were seeking at the time. Keep in mind, in the early to mid-2000s, the Supersport CC class was a manufacturer's bread and butter. It was where a majority of sales came from. So for Triumph to solidify their market presence, they had to bring the heat and put out a motorcycle that was a proper Supersport. And in 2006, they did just that by introducing the first generation Daytona 675. Triumph quite literally struck gold with the Daytona 675. Normally a manufacturer creating a bike that was already so close to the competition with the Daytona 650, you'd imagine they'd create a bike that was simply a model refresh, maybe an update with a few tweaks. But nope. That's not the way Triumph rolls. They put out a brand new, completely revised from the ground up middleweight Supersport motorcycle that had a brand new 3-cylinder engine, razor sharp looks, an undertail exhaust, which was all the rage back in the mid-2000s, and overall one of the greatest motorcycle packages ever created. And that's not just my completely biased opinion. Go check out nearly any review of the first generation Daytona 675. It was a breath of fresh air in the marketplace, and Triumph finally found their niche. It was in their darling 3-cylinder bike all along. Gobs of torque in the mid-range, a super small and featherweight flickable chassis, the first generation 675 was a total gem, and the sales volume backed it up. The bike was a hit and spawned some new die-hard Triumph fans, myself included. In 2011, they launched the 675R, a factory-ready track weapon with quick shifter, Olin suspension front and rear, and carbon fiber bits all over it. Then in 2013, even though Triumph was riding high with a sport bike that finally kicked some ass, they revised the bike yet again and created the current generation 675. Triumph could have gone the way of Yamaha and held on to the Daytonas from 2006 onward, but in 2013 they rolled out a significantly revised edition of the Daytona. At first glance, it looks like a mild change, but the motor had significant improvements with a 400 RPM breadline bump up to 14,400, several geometry and chassis tweaks such as relocating the exhaust further down, shedding some weight, and making the ergonomics a bit less committed. The latest 675, in my humble and totally non-biased opinion, is a masterpiece. I've ridden lots of different bikes and nothing comes close. It's a perfectly balanced chassis, a complete sweetheart of an engine that sings all the way to redline, a perfect track weapon, and a weekend twisty road carver. It's one of the best bikes ever made. And yes, I'm biased, I own one, whatever. And that's it, guys.
So it's February in 2013, it's a little bit cold, but we've got Triumph's new Daytona 675 and their old Daytona 675. We've got a 2-mile runway, we've got plenty of corners, we've got dry roads, so we're going to answer some important questions. Is the new one quicker than the old one? And is the new one got more mid-range and better brakes and better handling? So I'm off to go get my levers on, start getting a bit cold, and Bruce has got some speed testing to do. Off you go, Bruce. Okay, so we've just bought the new Daytona down to DSD Performance. As you can tell by the bike, it's done around 500 road miles, and you've already seen all the speed tests in front and top. So what we're going to do now is put the bike on the dyno and find out what the actual back wheel performance is. So you've seen the bike's been speed tested, and interestingly, the old bike is actually a little bit quicker than the new bike. But that's more down to the gearing, because don't forget, the new bike is 1 tube smaller on the front sprocket than the old bike. So in acceleration, 0 to 60, 0 to 120, and even 0 to 140, the new bike is quicker. Also, when you roll the bike on through the gears, from 30 miles an hour in 4th gear for example, Again, the new bike is quicker. We've had both bikes on the dyno. The new bike has a much smoother, linear torque curve and power curve and produces a few more horsepower at the top end. So that's all the facts and figures, but what are they actually like to ride in the real world? Obvious changes: the mirrors are slightly better on the new bike. You've now got a fuel gauge rather than a fuel light on the new bike. The new bike is slightly roomier. Bars are a little bit higher. Chassis wise, the steering is more precise, it turns a little easier, holds the line better, and the suspension's a little bit more compliant. For you race boys, you've got a big air induction, so it's going to be easier to tune the engine to get more air in. Bigger the lungs, the more horsepower you're going to have. The biggest problem Triumph have is the old bike is still an excellent bike. I did around 400 miles on the old bike and still really liked it. I'm unsure whether I'd trade up if I had the old bike to the new bike, but what I can say for sure is the new bike is an excellent bike. It looks good, it's quicker, it's got more torque, it's got more power, it's got a more precise chassis. But the problem is the old bike is still a good one too.